Good morning. I am really excited to be talking to you today about this topic. This webinar is all about rebuilding trust, and we're looking at all the different things that go into emotional betrayal, and well, more broadly than emotional, actually, all things fidelity, infidelity, trust, repair, reconnection. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what kind of constitutes cheating or betrayal, why that's so hard to define, and what the stages are to repairing if the people in the relationship want to repair. I do a little bit of work in this space in my practice. So people come to see me sometimes after infidelity. Some of that work is with all the people in the relationship, and some of that work is individual. Someone coming to me after they have experienced their partner's betrayal or they themselves have done the betraying. So I've worked at this from all different angles. And I want to kind of set the context here right from the start that this is not a place of judgment. That does not mean that I condone deceit or infidelity of any kind. Of course not. You know, Esther Perel, who you're going to hear me quote a little bit today, she's a very well-known relationship therapist. And she says that she would no more recommend an affair than she would recommend someone get cancer. Now, after cancer, people can, of course, experience uh, positivity. They can experience positive changes to their outlook on life and their well-being, and they can make positive changes. And so good can come from it. But she is saying, I would no more recommend that than an affair, in that good can come after an affair. That doesn't mean I recommend it. Doesn't mean it's good for a relationship, but good can come from it. So this is a space, the space I'm going to spend with you this morning. This is a space where we explore and seek to deepen understanding. Nothing good comes from judgment. That is going to shut down the conversation. So if I start this by saying, people who betray someone's trust are bad, or you should leave them, all that does is shut things down. There is no room for growth. So while I don't condone it, I do seek to deepen our understanding of it, and I do firmly believe that relationships can recover and people can build new relationships and new ways of trusting together. So I just wanted to set that context right, excuse me, right from the start. So what we will cover today, I'm just going to open up my notes because I've got some notes prepared as always. What we will cover today is a little bit about what betrayal can look like, what it does to a relationship, what it involves, what the stages of repair are, and then a bit about what happens afterwards. How do we look after this new relationship and how do we rebuild intimacy? So let's get into that. I want to kind of use this word betrayal, I think deliberately today, pretty broadly. I want to do that deliberately to build a sort of pretty broad narrative so that wherever you're meeting me today, and if you're watching this and you might even come back to it and rewatch it, I want you to feel like that you can watch this wherever you're at, uh, whatever betrayal has potentially happened in your relationship. I think what's important to understand about betrayal of any kind is that we're talking about a betrayal of trust, and trust is a very emotional experience. Trust is a behavior as well, but we can only experience a felt sense of trust and then engage in trust building behaviors when we experience a sense of emotional safety. What that means is if there's been a betrayal, it cannot be rebuilt. The trust cannot be rebuilt logically. So I cannot logic my way back into somebody's good books here. I cannot put forth a debate or convince my partner to trust me with logic because trust is not experienced up here in the cerebral part of my brain. Trust is a felt sense of safety. What that means is after a betrayal of trust, people can experience a trauma like response because just like trust is experienced in the body, so too is betrayal. And a betrayal of trust can really shake one's sense of safety in the world because it disrupts my understanding of my place in the world. So if I've experienced a betrayal at the hands of my partner, I can experience a sense of like, who is this person? I don't know this person. I don't understand my own worldview. I can't trust my judgment. This set of beliefs that I had have now all been shattered. What does this mean now about my place in the world? So there's a lot of signs here that make me go, no wonder there is a trauma response that it happens after a betrayal. So the types of trauma symptoms that I see most commonly after a betrayal are definitely a replaying or a almost like a re-experiencing of the event. So that is things like intrusive memories, potentially flashbacks, nightmares, replaying events over and over, looking for those moments where you could have done something different. By the way, this is a really common trauma response of the brain. Our brain will go back to a traumatic event and it will seek to find the thing that we could have done differently so that it feels like we can protect ourselves from it happening again, even though, of course, we've done nothing wrong and couldn't have done something different, which is so often the case, right? So our brains will do this after all sorts of traumatic events, car accidents, assaults, um, major injuries or illnesses, and relationship betrayals. It will go back over where's the thing I could have done differently so that I can find it and go, there it is. That's what I missed. That's the thing I got wrong. Here's the thing now that I can control to make sure this doesn't happen again. Other trauma symptoms I see commonly after betrayal are, excuse me, in the category of hypervigilance. So this is like a sort of exaggerated startle response, on guardness, hyper alertness, looking for those signs of like the threat happening again. This can also really interfere with things like our concentration, our sleep, that kind of stuff. The other major category of trauma symptoms that I see is kind of negative alterations to our mood or our thoughts. So this can be things like low mood, but it can also be some like really negative cognitions, self-talk here. So this can be about blame of self or others, or self-talk about the world. So my safety in the world is no longer safe, that kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of set that scene because so often there is this desire to, if there is a desire to rebuild, there is a desire to do that as quickly as possible, and people will go to logic. Like, what's the thing that I can say or do to kind of get over this, right? So and I hear from the other person in the relationship often this frustration or this sense of like, I've said sorry, I am sorry, I've answered all their questions. But I'm so often having this conversation over and over again that this isn't a logic process. This is a process to go through that our body needs to go through to reestablish a sense of safety. And it's only then that we can rebuild trust. I just want to say that again because that's a really important point. We need to go through this process for my nervous system to understand I am safe again in order for me to trust again, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I just want to stay with that for a minute. I also want to take a moment to touch on here just this concept of betrayal and how common it is. And when we talk about betrayal in relationships and we talk about betrayals of trust, I know we go to infidelity and cheating, but even those terms are not clearly defined. And I want to put to you some common examples of behaviors in relationships that I hear talked about every day in my practice and actually in my personal life with my friends and in my own relationship. And I want to put these to you as a list, and I want you to just take a moment to think about where these sit for you. Would these constitute cheating or betrayal? Or would they constitute behavior that you don't like or behavior that you're not comfortable with? Or would they constitute things that you're actually okay with? And does that change depending on the relationship you're in? So think about some of these. Having sex with someone else, kissing someone else, sexting someone else, flirting with someone else, having a drunk makeout at a nightclub that your partner can't even really remember, uh, watching pornography, subscribing to someone on OnlyFans and paying to access their content, subscribing to someone on OnlyFans that they know personally, live pornography, so like webcamming, talking to somebody live on camera. Hmm. Cybersex with a stranger, sexting with a stranger, sending a flirty DM to someone on Instagram, liking someone's thirst trap on Instagram, or reacting with a fire emoji on Instagram, building a really strong emotional connection with someone else at work, telling other people things that you don't share with your partner, complaining about your partner to someone else, developing feelings for someone else, having sexual fantasies about someone else, thinking about someone else while you have sex with your partner or while you masturbate, masturbating. So I want you to think about this list that I've just said to you. And I promise you, if I lined up 10 people, I would get 10 different reactions about which of those constitute a betrayal or not. That is why this is such an important topic that I'm talking to you about today, because given that list is so diverse, there is a fair chance that you're going to experience some of those in your relationship. And so often in relationships, people are not having these conversations proactively. So when people use words like a betrayal is something outside of your relationship agreement, I am quick to notice how few people have even really had these conversations, even have a relationship agreement. Instead, monogamy is built, or relationship agreements are built on assumptions. My understanding of what is okay in a relationship is built on my own experiences and assumptions. So often these relationship agreements are actually built reactively. You know, someone discovers their partner watching pornography, tells their partner they don't like it, they'd rather not do it. And then from there, there's a conversation or a negotiation or a conflict about the pornography, and maybe a consensus is reached. I'm not saying it's abided by. Maybe pornography use is now hidden because there is a discovery that my partner doesn't like this. So often our relationship agreements are built reactively rather than proactively, which of course leaves the relationship so exposed to betrayal. I want to kind of touch on the fact that non-monogamous relationships are still really vulnerable to betrayal. The only thing that I would say grants non-monogamous relationships some of additional protection, if you like, is usually they've had more of these agreement conversations. They've had to, if they're practicing ethical non-monogamy, they've had to have the conversations of what's in, what's out. What are we okay with? What are we not okay with? Right? So relationships, whether monogamous or not, that have had these conversations tend to be more protected in terms of we understand what is betrayal and what is not. That doesn't mean they're more protected from betrayal happening or not, but at least there's clarity on what constitutes betrayal or not. So I've talked there a little about concepts of trust and concepts of betrayal and relationships agreements. I want to move now to talking about stages of repair. How do we rebuild trust, connection, and intimacy? And I want to talk about these stages of repair. Trust is really rebuilt over time through consistent action, accountability, and emotional presence. As I said before, it's not rebuilt through like launching a good debate, a good case, a good rebuttal, a good argument. It's through consistent action, accountability, and emotional presence. Excuse me. So, John and Julie Gottman, who are, in my opinion, the godmother and godfather of all things relationships, have identified through their extensive work these three stages of repair. And I think this is a really nice framework for rebuilding after and betrayal. Often these three stages are facilitated through therapy, but I want to share them with you here because I understand that therapy is not suitable or accessible for everyone. And I firmly believe couples can utilize strategies from each of these three stages. I think therapy is very beneficial after repair, but I still think there's work that couples can do on their own. I'm going to take you through each of the three stages. The three stages are atone, attune, and attach. Atonement is about taking responsibility with depth. Attunement is about connecting through empathy, emotional safety, and emotional presence. And finally, attaching is about rebuilding together with intention. Can we create something strong and safe together? So I want to take you through each of those. Atonement answers this core question of, can I believe that you truly understand the hurt that you have caused? Trust begins to be repaired here, but trust does not come through convincing. I want to say it again. I think there is a sense of like, I've said sorry, I've promised it won't happen again, and I've meant it. Surely that's enough. Just believe me. Believe me that it won't happen again, but it is not enough. It is not enough. Atonement really comes by genuinely acknowledging the impact of the betrayal. It is a full, clear, and unambiguous ownership of what happened, the behaviors that occurred, and the damage that was done, right? So it is a real acknowledgement of the impact. This is about full accountability and full ownership and taking time to go through the process, right? So there is a willingness here on both parts to ask and answer honestly the hard questions. And it will probably mean, and in my experience, this is certainly the case, it will probably mean answering the hard questions over and over again. And I understand that can be really frustrating. There can be a sense of like, I don't want to say this thing out loud again. I've already answered this. Why do you keep asking this? I think that too, it's important to understand that irritability and that frustration that we might see from the person who's doing more of the answering isn't just about feeling frustrated, it's actually about feeling ashamed. It's about, I don't want to keep putting words to this thing that I've done, this thing that I feel deep shame for. I don't want to say it again, which I really understand. But this is the process, and this can take time. The amount of time it takes varies. Couples can take months and months and months to go through this process of atonement, of taking responsibility, of a felt sense of like, this person really is sorry and they really do recognize the impact, that recognition of the emotional injury, not just of their behavior. So, not just this is what I did and I know it was wrong and I'm sorry and it really won't happen again. The bit that needs to be added to that is, and I know the impact I've caused. Here is what I understand about your experience. This is what I hear you saying. This is what I see you feeling. And I know I did that. And I know that I'm sorry. And I know that you're hurting. Usually, this is the stage that involves a lot of transparency too. So, this is a really interesting point because I get a lot of questions about this around like, what does this mean in terms of how I demonstrate transparency? Things like my partner wants me to call more often during the day, or they want access to my phone or my social media. What do I do here? Like, where's my comfort in this? So this is a really interesting point. I firmly believe that transparency is required to move forward, but both people need to be willing to move through this stage, right? And that this stage has a sort of, not a hard end, but it does have edges to it. So, what I mean by that is the couples that do this well and do this successfully, there is a closing off of this, like an edge to this, where I'm not going to be asking you to atone or apologize forever or give me phone access to your phone and your social media forever. This is for now, while I am in a stage of recovery, rebuilding, trauma. This is what I need to reestablish a sense of safety. The other person is then willing to say, I understand that I broke your trust and I can see how deeply I have injured you. And I take full responsibility for that pain. And I'm committed to earning trust back. I don't expect it. But I think what you can expect here in this stage is that attunement, which is the next stage, can only be achieved through this repeated, consistent atonement until both parties feel safe enough to move forward. This stage can be really exhausting for everyone involved. And I get that. It can sometimes go longer than you think, or you might feel like you've made a lot of progress and then it feels like it's slipped back. So this part of this process is really a commitment. It needs to be gone through. You cannot perform or fake your way through this, right? But this needs to come to reestablish safety before we can move on to the second stage, which is attunement. Okay, let me talk to you about attunement. Attunement only comes through reestablishing safety, emotional closeness, and empathy. Both people in the relationship need to be able to trust that the other is emotionally present with them. This is at the heart of repair, listening to the pain caused, staying open and curious and willing in the face of discomfort, and building new patterns of emotional responsiveness. Now, what is really key here is that all parties involved in the relationship, whether there's two of you or more in the relationship, are building these new patterns of closeness together and are willing to stay open and curious to hearing each other. Esther Perel says something that I think is really hard for people to hear if they've experienced a betrayal, but I'm going to say it here because it's important. She says the victim of the affair is not always the victim of the marriage. And that is, I want to be clear what she means there. She is not talking about blame. She's not saying whose fault was the affair, but rather she is saying that there were pain and there was hurt in the relationship, usually on both sides, right? Again, I want to be clear what she's saying there, because what she says in her work, and this is proven in the research, is that people cheat or betray for all sorts of reasons, right? We imagine that we can inoculate our relationship against betrayal by doing certain things to make it happy and well. Like if we have date nights, if we have sex regularly, if we laugh together, if we play together, if we travel together, if we talk openly, I can protect my relationship. But actually, people cheat for all sorts of reasons. And people cheat often in very loving, happy relationships, right? So this is really important to hold space for understanding on both sides. And that's what I really think of this second stage, this attunement stage, as being about. It's about deepening understanding of what happened, what led up to the betrayal, what the betrayal involved, and how the betrayal impacted us. Deepening understanding. Emotional closeness, emotional safety, emotional repair cannot be achieved without curiosity, openness, and deepening understanding. I have talked before in other forums, including, I think I've got a video in my Unbound library about this, about key components to these types of conversations and the importance of validation, curiosity, and clarification. They are three things that will help you stay regulated and open in the face of very uncomfortable conversations. Remember those three things. Validation is not about agreeing with my partner, but it's about saying, thank you for telling me that. Validating is about saying, I hear you, I see you. Thank you for telling me that. That helps me understand you more. I can see that was hard for you to say. I appreciate you trusting me with this. Can you tell me more? That is validation, right? Not, it's not agreeing. It's not saying you're right, right? That might not be the case. You might not agree. And that's so often the case. I don't agree with what my partner says, but it's about validating that what they're saying is their experience and that I care about their experience. Curiosity is about asking more questions. I didn't know that you felt that way. Can you tell me more about when that started showing up for you? Has this happened for you before? Have you felt this way in other relationships? Have you felt this way before in our relationship? What was that like for you? What does that do to you? What does that bring up for you? What does that remind you of? What does that trigger you about? Curiosity. I want to know more. Tell me more. And clarification is so important because communication goes through four gates. The first gate is what I intend and what I mean. The second gate is what I say. The third gate is what my partner hears. And the fourth gate is how they make meaning of it. So you can see through those four gates how the communication might change and how the meaning might change, right? So clarification is about saying, I've just heard you say this, and this is how I've understood it. Have I got that right? Or you can seek your own clarification. I feel like because I'm a bit emotional at the moment, I'm not communicating very clearly. Can you tell me what you've just heard? It's wild how often someone will repeat back what they've heard us say, and we're like, oh my gosh, that is not what I meant at all. And that's a beautiful opportunity to course correct. Hang on, that's not what I meant for you to hear. Can I go again? Right? These strategies are wonderful for several reasons. One, they demonstrate empathy, right? I really care about your experience. I'm not ready to just rebut and jump in with my own. I can really make space for both of our experiences here. This also makes space for a range of emotions. So it builds tolerance for discomfort because I can make space for anger, fear, anxiety, sadness, grief, ambivalence, neutrality, intimacy, vulnerability. I can make space for them if I validate, ask questions, and clarify. Finally, my favorite thing about those tools is they are so regulating. And these types of attunement conversations, of repairing conversations, are so dysregulating for so many people. And I've said this to you before, but I'll continue to labor the point. If you are becoming dysregulated in a conversation, you must take a break. Nothing good happens when we are overwhelmed, flooded, and dysregulated. You cannot continue the conversation in that state. You need to take a break. That break must be at least 20 minutes and must be no more than 24 hours. So the point is, I need to take a break. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to go have a lie down, and I will be back to this conversation in an hour. Okay. Nothing good happens when we are dysregulated. Those strategies of validation, curiosity, and clarification will help you stay regulated. And what we are wanting to communicate in these conversations is I want to hear about your experience, even if that's hard. I care about your experience. I want you to express your feelings to me, and I want you to feel understood. All right. Help me understand. Tell me more about that. These are key phrases in this atonement stage. This stage, when done well, will and should reveal deeper relationship and attachment issues and wounds that predate the betrayal. It is highly likely that if this stage is done well, other unmet needs will surface. And this is wonderful. This is part of the healing, and it's not a derailment. It is part of the rebuilding, right? And this rebuilding, this recreation, is what brings us to the third stage of repair. The third stage is called attachment. Esther Perel often says in her work that she says to her clients, your relationship is over. The relationship you had before the betrayal is over. Do you want to build a new one together? And that can be very mixed feelings for people. There can be grief, of course. There's grief for what we lost or what we thought we were going to have. But there can be excitement and energy and reinvigoration for what we can build. This is very exciting. People will often build a more intentional, more honest, more real bond. So what we want to reestablish here is intimacy, trust in our daily interactions, sexual connection, and ultimately what couples need is shared meaning, shared vision and meaning for our life together and our future together. So what we're establishing here is re-establishment of intimacy, both physical and emotional, gradually, right? This is gradual reintroduction of intimacy and safety. There's also a need here for new agreements. We cannot have a relationship here that still has unspoken expectations. Couples must be willing to have really intentional conversations and make new agreements about what constitutes their relationship. New rituals of connection might emerge here. Couples that never have regular date nights will suddenly realize they need to prioritize them weekly. They might need more structure. They might need more relationship check-ins. Couples who've had their sense of safety rocked might need more frequent, more in-depth relationship check-ins, right? So couples that never had relationship check-ins might need them for a while weekly, then maybe monthly. But this is about the two people in the relationship constantly checking in with each other. What do we need? What do you need? What do I need? What helps us feel connected, safe, and loved? Let's design our relationship in a way that achieves those things. So some really practical things that I sometimes get couples to do here are new daily rituals. So that can be about the 6-second kiss, the 20-second hug in the morning, and when they get home at night. This can be about the two people agreeing that that's what they do when they get home at night before they do anything else, before they say hi to the kids or the dog or get changed or have a shower, they physically connect. There can be end of day debriefs. There can be curiosity practices. What are the questions that people ask each other about their day, their week, their month? How do we check in on our relationship? But also, how do we check in on each other as individual people? How do we rebuild intimacy through non-physical closeness? So I love to get couples to practice, sorry, not non-physical, non-sexual physical closeness. So I love to get people to practice things like hand holding, hugging, kissing, massages, closeness on the couch, practicing these things without the expectation of escalation to something more sexual. So all these rituals that might be new ways of interacting with each other they haven't done before. This is really powerful. This is not about dismissing what we had before or forgetting or like putting it behind me, like this didn't happen, right? It didn't exist. But this is about reclaiming a new relationship narrative. And we build secure connection through repetition, repeat experiences of closeness, of trust, of connection, of repair, of communication. So I just want to summarize those 3 stages for you that I've talked about. So the first one was atonement. This one is all about responsibility and accountability. This requires apology, transparency, honesty, and ownership, right? The things to watch out for that can derail this part of the process are trying to rush through it. We can't rush through it. So we might try to rush to forgiveness or rush to trusting again. We might avoid asking or answering the hard questions. Minimizing is a risk here, minimizing of action. And defensiveness is a risk here, right? There's such discomfort. Avoidance of the discomfort through defensiveness is a risk here. The second stage is about attunement. This is where emotional presence is key. Are you here with me in my emotions? Empathy is important here. So is active listening, regulation, using those tools of validation, curiosity, and clarification over and over again. The risks here are again minimizing, but that can be about people minimizing their pain or their emotional experience. There's also a risk here for dysregulation, and that can look like volatility, but also shutdown. There can also be a risk here of over explaining oneself, right? And over explaining is something we do sometimes to avoid being emotionally present. So I can put a lot of words, I can intellectualize my feelings or my actions, and it's a way of avoiding vulnerability and emotional presence. So watch out for that too. And then the final stage after atonement and attunement is about attachment. That is that reconnection and that future forward, future facing of the relationship. So this is about a new relationship, check-ins, shared rituals, new agreements, fresh honesty, intentionality, and a return to intimacy. Now, the pitfalls to watch out for here are about rushing, skipping. So that can look like, here in this stage, that can look like avoidance of those deeper conversations. And it's also easy here to perform moving on. Yeah, I'm fine. Like we're good now. We've done the therapy. We've done the he said sorry, or she's atoned, or she's let me see her phone, or he's apologized a million times. We're fine. So this performance of moving on is something to watch for here. It needs to be a genuine felt sense. Okay. So we've talked there a little bit how to move through those three stages. I want to remind you here about what happens in this rebuilding stage in terms of the effort that is required. I talked in one of my recent emails to you about this idea of watering. The grass is greener where you water it, right? And I love this philosophy because I do believe work is required in all relationships. Intentional effort is required. I put in intentional effort into my own relationship every single day. And I say it over and over again that I'm in the best relationship of my life currently, but I've also never worked so hard in my life. This idea of watering the garden is really important. So some of those activities that I talked about there, this idea of creating shared rituals, asking each other great questions, putting structure and agreements in place, relationship check-ins, checking in with each other constantly. This is effortful every single day and for the duration of your relationship. I want to be clear about this, that this isn't just about a period of rebuilding. This is forever. This idea of trust and closeness and connection and intention is forever. Now, before I finish up, I want to just touch on, of course, sex and eroticism after a betrayal. The difficult tension here is that everything I've talked about so far is all about emotional intimacy and closeness and safety. But actually, also, what we need here is some space. So that's a difficult tension to hold, but eroticism doesn't exist in surveillance, right? So eroticism and desire is going to be really hard to access in those initial stages where someone doesn't feel safe and maybe they are wanting to check someone's social media messages all the time or want to check in over text message regularly during the day. That is not going to be a breeding ground for desire after betrayal. Desire and intimacy and eroticism is a very personal journey after betrayal. I sometimes hear from people that immediately after a betrayal is discovered, that suddenly we're having the best sex of our lives. And this is really interesting for me to kind of unpack with people because often what I discover is that what is creating the hotness, the eroticism, is actually the lack of safety, the fear, the fear response creating an arousal response. The sense of like, I don't know you at all creates a lot of space for desire to thrive. But more often than not, what I hear is that is incredibly short-lived, right? That phase of like, this is hot, I feel drawn to you after a betrayal is a short-lived phase. Long-term sexual intimacy comes with time, honesty, a rebuilding of safety, and an ability to maintain that tension of I am emotionally connected to you, but also we have separateness and space from each other. I can go about my day and not see you all day and still feel safe and connected. And we come back together and have things to talk about. And that feels arousing. That feels like aliveness, right? So that tension of I feel emotionally safe and close to you, but also we have enough separation uh, to see each other as individuals and have things to talk about when we come back together is a delicate balance. If you are watching this and you are in the throes of recovering from a relationship betrayal, regardless of your role in it, I just wanted to say that I'm sending you like lots of positive vibes and love because I know this is a period of work. If you are in the relationship and trying to recover, it is a period of work. I haven't touched on this, but I also know it can be such a period of loneliness and isolation because socially there is a lot of judgment for betrayal. I understand there's a lot of narratives out there like if someone cheats, leave them. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Pack your bags, and if you stay, you're letting them walk all over you. I don't believe any of those things that I just said to be true, right? So you might be feeling quite lonely in your decision to rebuild. And if that's the case, I want to let you know you are definitely not alone. Okay. Takes a huge amount of work to do this, but I have seen relationships recover and come out stronger. So I am sending you lots of positive vibes, but I am also enormously excited for you to see what your relationship can be. No matter where you're at in your relationship, if you are watching this and there is a relationship that you are in of any kind, romantic or otherwise, that you care about, I want you to think about what you've heard me talk about today about the importance of intentionality, of effort, and of rituals for connection and closeness, right? I want you to think about one thing you could do this week in a relationship that you care about to put in some intentional effort. And I'm going to be a bit hard on you here. Sending a check-in text is not it, right? I'm talking about intentional effort. It might be sharing something, your own vulnerability. It might be asking them about something that you know they normally avoid. But I want you to do something effortful in a relationship that you care about this week. Finally, I want to share a couple of resources with you. Um, I have mentioned here the work of John and Julie Gottman, and I've also mentioned here the work of Esther Perel. So their resources are resources that I will always recommend. Esther Perel has a couple of resources I'm going to mention here. She has two books. One is Mating in Captivity, which is all about long-term relationships and this tension of like closeness, but also needing space. But the other book that I'm definitely going to recommend based on what we've talked about today is The State of Affairs, which is all about infidelity. If you read one book about betrayal in relationships, make it this book, right? It is a very nuanced yet practical look at affairs, at infidelity, at betrayal and recovery. Her work is excellent. Now, John and Julie Gottman, their work is incredibly practical. I love it. I mentioned those three stages that I mentioned today come from their work, and their work is often framed like that. It's framed as stages, as practical exercises for couples to undertake. Their website is full of blogs, workshops, videos, all sorts of things that you can watch. But if you were to pick up one thing from the Gottmans, it would be to download their app. They have an app of card decks, which are simple question cards that you can do with anyone in your life. They're not just for romantic relationships. Some of them are, but not all of them. And you can use these cards to deepen your understanding of another person that you care about. Their work is really grounded in this idea of what can we achieve, what can we discover when we deepen our understanding of the other, which I love. There's so much to discover about the other. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope it's been helpful. Just a quick recap. We have covered here themes of what even constitutes betrayal, what happens when we are betrayed, what happens in our body, what it takes to reestablish trust. And we've also covered those three stages of atone, attune, and attach. And we've talked there about practical things you can do to repair after a relationship and reestablish intimacy, trust, and closeness. I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, I so love getting your feedback. When I get a message from one of you that's like, here's what I got out of this, or here's what I'm trying, or here's what I learned, or I'd love to hear more about this. It's really energizing for me. I love making content that speaks to you and what you need. So please don't hesitate to reach out. As always, you can email me or message me on Instagram. So please do that. I welcome it. I love it. It fills my cup. Thank you so much for watching. I am going to stop the recording now, but reach out if you need anything else from me or any more resources. Thanks for watching.